Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Candor with Prez Yves. I am delighted to be joined today by Doctors Sabrina Gentlewarrior of Bridgewater State University. She leads the Racial Equity and Justice Institute, and also with Dr. Tia McNair, who is a vice president at the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and she also directs the Truth in Racial Healing and Transformation program at AACNU. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So if I could ask you each to say a little bit about yourself to our audience, what draws you to the work around racial equity, and what do you see today as things that inspire you, and also some things that may concern you at this moment? Tia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I have been engaged in work. Thank you for inviting me for this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. So the work of focusing on racial equity has been something that has been at the heart of who I am as a practitioner and as an educator for ever since I started my professional career in higher education. I started off as a TRIO counselor, for those of you who are not familiar with the TRIO programs that are funded by the Department of Education. And those have been at the crux of really focusing on the work with underserved students in higher education. So that part is there. But with the work that I do at AACNU, I've been there for 11 years. And over the course of that, we have worked in focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. We focused on our national initiative, our signature initiative, Making Excellence Inclusive. And then when the opportunity came for us to really focus in on truth, racial healing, and transformation in partnership with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, we embraced that as a core part of our evolution in this work on what we need to do to focus on not only addressing the inequities in student outcomes that unfortunately we know by many, many reports, based on many reports, that they're widening, that those gaps are widening, and they are going to continue to widen as a result of the pandemic and what our institutions have faced over the past couple of years, and more particularly last year, But I also focusing in on this concept of us being more combative with each other, the concept of civility and integrity and deep listening and empathy. Those things we were being told by our institutional partners and students that it was harder to engage in conversations across differences. And we really wanted to make sure that that was a key part of our work. So everything is always evolving. I believe in a growth mindset in this work, and that we should be thinking about ways to improve our environments and to prepare the next generation of leaders. And those are some of the key areas that I'm thinking about in this work.
That's great. You've been engaged in this work for such a long time. It's wonderful to engage with you in other settings, Tia. I appreciate having you on the show today. How about you, Sabrina? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspires you in this work.
It's a pleasure to be here with the folks who are watching the podcast and to be with two of my sheroes in the work, Tia and Eve. Both of you are role models for me, so thank you. As a white person who benefits daily from whiteness and the white supremacy culture, I think it's essential that I be part of the work to address educational equity issues. Bridgewater State University, where I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President of Student Success and Diversity, was started in 1840 by Horace Mann, who famously said education is the great equalizer. It has not been that yet. As we're reminded by writing from the AACNU, educational equity is one of education's great unmet promises. And nowhere is that more true than for our Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and other students of color. We have seen these inequities be magnified during the pandemic. The ways in which the pandemic has disproportionately taken the lives of Black and Brown individuals, the ways in which it's interrupted the college-going access and continuation, needs to be a wake-up call for all of us in higher education. And then the ways in which we also, as we're listening for the calls for racially just policing out across America, we also have to remember that on most of our campuses, we also have police forces or community safety, campus safety officers. We also have to look at racially just policing on our campuses as well. So whether it's in our student service provision, outside the classroom, educational excellence through equity, which is absolutely the way to achieve educational excellence is through equity. Whether it's looking at our campus policing policies and practices, or the ways in which we prepare ourselves for the work as white people, or, and I speak with humbleness here and not with lived experience, heal from enduring systemic racism, institutional racism, and individual racism on a daily basis by our BIPOC and Alana colleagues on our campuses. We must all be engaged in the work. So I have the great privilege of working with some extraordinary facilitators who work together in leading something called the Racial Equity and Justice Institute. President Yves Salomon Fernandez is one of our facilitators. Thank you, Prez Yves. And what we do is we come together. Right now we have 29 campuses as well as a team from the Department of Higher Ed from Massachusetts to look at the truth on our campuses and in our organizations and say, what is really happening on our campuses for our Black and Brown and other students of color? So what we do is our mission statement is Leading for Change Racial Equity and Justice Institute engages in hopeful, data-informed strategies intended to eliminate racial educational equity gaps. And that's the work that I have the privilege of collaborating in at Bridgewater and then out across the region through the REJI. Thanks, Eve.
It's wonderful. That's been such a wonderful initiative to have that crosses states as well as institution types and engages both people of color as well as our white colleagues in thinking about how we work, not just with students, but with one another. I want to pick up on a theme that both of you alluded to, which is the pandemic, right? We have seen so many inequities surface during this pandemic, and most of these existed even before this health crisis. And now I think we have a sense that we can't just ignore them. What do you see us in higher education needing to pay more attention to now and into the immediate future? Either one of you can start.
Go ahead, Sabrina. I went first last time. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Well, I think in my introductory comments, I spoke to some of the things I'm concerned about and so many others are concerned about. We look at even the national research on FAFSA completion and how it's so much lower for students generally, but Black and Brown students specifically. So I think we need to look at the ways in which the pandemic has heightened educational inequities, both in college access and success completion. I think we have to look at the collective trauma that we've as a nation, but which has been disproportionately felt by some communities more than others. I think we need to engage in very careful, evidence-based, trauma-informed strategies for returning to campuses. And we also, and I'm channeling my colleague, Karen Jason, who's the Vice President of Operations here at Bridgewater, when I say, and there's also some of our colleagues, often the folks who keep the grounds and keep our buildings and our folks who have maintained the residence halls and kept the residence halls open for those campuses that have had a few students on their campuses during this time. There have been some of our colleagues who haven't gone home at all during this time. And whether people are returning back to campus after about 15, 16 months, or they've been on campus the whole time, I think there's a collective sense of trauma being defined as that which overwhelms our coping resources. And then you add in the systemic oppressions that were already at play before the pandemic. I think we're going to need to have campuses that are very ready to address all of these things in a compassionate but evidence-based way to make sure that we don't leave people behind as we move forward to the fall.
Thanks, Sabrina. I think that, I mean, those similar concerns that Sabrina just mentioned, but I also think that in the conversations that I've had with institutions, even over the past couple of months, I think that it's an opportunity for us to not go back to just serving students in the same way that we have been, or we had been before the pandemic. I think that it's important if we think about all of the student support services, all of the things that we're doing at the campus, and really trying to address those needs that we've identified. I mean, and trauma is one that Sabrina has identified very clearly, but we also have to acknowledge that some students thrived in this environment, others did not. Some students were able to embrace their learning, the online learning environment, and they were able to achieve their goals in relation to that. Others were not. I mean, so when you disaggregate the data on who fits within which categories and whether or not they were able to learn and have proficiencies in their learning, because at ASU, we're always going to be talking about quality and teaching and learning, then we've got to figure out where our students are and what additional supports they need in order to progress. I mean, we still have our responsibilities for student success. We still have the responsibility, as we say at ASU, to provide a high quality education to prepare students for work, life, and productive citizenship. And I think that it's important for us to not think that we can provide the same services in the same way before the pandemic in the way that we're going to be doing them now, because our students' needs have expanded. They're maybe different than they were before. So how are we taking a data-informed, as Sabrina's already said, a data-informed approach, and an approach to build, as we say in TRHT all the time, the people capacity to do this work. And we can't make assumptions that the people who are actually part of our co-curricular experiences at the institutions who have responsibility for leading those efforts are all of a sudden going to be able to reimagine their programs in a way that is going to best serve our students. And I think that we have to acknowledge them. We have to give them the professional development. We have to give them the support. We have to engage in that additional inquiry to find out, okay, what is it that we need to change in order to enhance these opportunities, learning opportunities, and these support services that we have with students. And I worry about that. I honestly worry about that we're going to go right back into the same cycle of doing it in the way that we are, but not being responsive to our students' needs.
It's a really good point. Tia, you've published very widely on this subject. You're the author of From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, and you give in that book some very vivid vignettes as well as examples for what college leaders and people across the hierarchy, across different functions can do to promote equity and promote excellence, educational excellence through equity. As you look at us going back into the fall, what might you pull from the book about the structures or mindsets that you see us needing to adopt to ensure the success of all students, especially those that have historically and most recently, because of the pandemic, been left behind?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I just want to acknowledge my co-authors, Estella Ben-Simone and Lindsay Malcolm-Pique of our book, From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, Expanding Practitioner Knowledge for Racial Justice. I mean, in particular, we really wanted to focus on racial justice within higher education. So a couple of things that I've been talking about with institutions is really acknowledging that there's no such thing as a race neutral policy. So let's just call that what it is. There's no such thing as a race neutral policy, and that means that we're not really if we think that exists and we don't understand the racialized consequences in every decision that we make for our students, then we're not really understanding, we're not being systemically aware. We're not being aware of the impact of our decisions on students. We also talk about the myth of universalism, that one thing that you're going to do is going to be the thing that's going to serve all of the students in the same way. And that is not true. We also talk about the obstacles of acknowledging that white privilege does exist and that we have institutionalized racism is real and it is there, and we have racialized practices. And when I'm presenting and I'm talking about this, I really reference a lot the survey that we did with our presidents and a part of our President's Trust early on. And 80% of them said there's an urgent need for us to deal with systemic racism within higher education. And we need to start interrogating our policies and our practices. We need to actually, think about hiring. We need to think about curriculum reform. We need to think about all of those things. What for me is a challenge is we all have those, most institutions, I'm going to say all, put out statements last year in support of this work, doing exactly that. Like, we need to address racism within higher education. And I'm getting ready to release an article as part of our Liberal Education magazine. When I wrote, "When the outrage subsides," I worry that when we're no longer in this heightened level of awareness of racism and racialized practices because of the ongoing killings of Black citizens within this country, or the anti-Asian, violence that we had, and the hate that's happening. I mean, just across the board, all of these pieces that have come together to raise this level of heightened awareness. I honestly worry that we're going to go back to business as usual, or what we think is business as usual, where honestly, we wrote the book and released it in January 2020 because we knew then, as we know now, that racial injustices were continuing. And the thing is that we have become in this place of, yes, we know there are inequities in student outcomes. Yes, we know that some students are successful and others, and we just are not willing to do the work necessary. And that is something that keeps me up at night, is, are we really willing to do the difficult work, or do we just want to do the checkbox? And let's check it off. We had a workshop on it. Let's check it off. We talked about it, but then you leave that workshop and you go back to doing the same things. And that is something that worries me. And those are those obstacles to racial equity, and doing those and addressing those obstacles and dealing with the pieces that we're talking about in the book is not going to happen. The change isn't going to happen overnight. But we really need to be thinking about how we as people, as educators, engage in this work and what we need to do in order to be successful.
That's great. Sabrina, I wonder if you share the same worry, and also how you think we might be able to support not just students, but also faculty and staff of all identities who are engaged in DEI work on our campuses as we come back to campus.
Yeah, I worry about it a lot. White America has had a real approach, avoid history with working and looking at these issues in a long-term and consistent way. And I hope this time white America stays focused on the work that must be done. The most powerful part of the book that Tia, Estella, and Lindsay wrote for me was on page 45 of the paper version, I think also the Kindle version. So if I can just quote some of your words, Tia, I have them here in front of me, and then talk about how they can be used, to my mind, to transform higher education. I've been doing the work for a while, and I read these questions and I thought, if we do this, just this, our paradigm changes, our practices change. So page 45, for those reading along at home, they ask, who benefits from our work? In what ways could this practice, program, or policy disadvantage minoritized students? Who by race or ethnicity is most likely to benefit from this practice, program, policy? Why? How did the architects of this practice, program, or policy take racial equity into account? And the last question posed by the authors, who by race and ethnicity might not meet the criteria that determine who qualifies to be hired, to be accepted into an honors program, or to receive program benefits? End quote. Thank you, Tia, Estella, and Lindsay. We've used those questions a lot at Bridgewater State University, where I have the pleasure of serving. We've also used them as our guiding structure in the Racial Equity and Justice Institute and continue to do so, I've seen people use those questions and transform how space utilization on campuses is used, how teaching practices are approached, how budget decisions are made. At Bridgewater, we're at the very beginning, so I don't want to overstate. We're at the very beginning of exploring using those questions to help us think about our enterprise risk management from an equity enterprise risk management. Because what it means, right? What these three amazing women authors did for us is they said, it's not okay to have a one size fits all, which really means typically in higher ed on most of our campuses, white females, right? This approach where we apply it to everybody is not supporting our Black and brown students. And if we centralize these questions first, we decenter whiteness, we centralize racial equity and justice. And what has been so astounding to me, Tia, is that these questions, I don't want to make this more simple because this is hard work, but the path forward becomes very clear. The ways in which those policies and practices need to change, especially when you combine it with disaggregated data, becomes very clear. So that's for students, but I also think that if we can, in our institutions, to your question, Eve, apply those also when we look at, you said the people doing the work, but also the Alana BIPOC folks who are working on our campuses, whether they're involved in DEI work or not. Right. We will be institutions transformed. I can tell you at Bridgewater, for some folks, for Bridgewater State University, where I have the pleasure of serving, is an aspirational peer. Mm-hmm. And this last summer, after the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others, some of our Black and brown students and their white accomplices told us we needed to do more. And we realized they were right. So President Clark convened a 70-member racial justice task force that involved over 1,000 members of our campus. And that very extensive examination of who we are has been released to the campus, and President Clark is of course going into action planning for next steps. There's a real difference between we are coming to look at ourselves closer in a mirror and say, there's a real difference between engaging in actions of anti-racism and racial educational equity and being an anti-racist equitable university.
Agree.
And so what I'm suggesting is we need an entire paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate it. To anyone who's listening to the webcast, use those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions and see what happens. It won't be the end, but it will certainly be an important and interesting beginning to apply those questions from Equity Talk to Equity Walk. Tia, I say publicly, I'm not one of your agents, but I'm not doing this for any other reason except that I think the work is.
Well, and can I just say thank you for that, but I also want to acknowledge also the collective effort of all the institutions that we worked with and continue to work with. But one thing that you said, Sabrina, that was very clear is that when President Clark convened the group, it wasn't convened to go to solutions immediately. It was convened to actually understand the narrative about race and racism at the institution, to understand who you are, to do that deep listening, to do that engagement so that you can think about next steps. You can think about your leverage points for change. You can think about what it means to create a positive, a more positive, or even move from a negative to a positive viewpoint on race. I want people to understand that truth-telling part, and you've mentioned it earlier, and you've mentioned it too. I mean, we've had these conversations about this. The truth-telling part, which is very difficult. It brings up lots of emotions. This is as Gail Christopher, who's the visionary and architect of the TRHT effort, says, this work requires the head and the heart. You cannot just do it from one perspective, from an intellectual perspective, or only solely from a very deeply personal perspective. It takes both, the intersections of both. But that piece is so key. And I think so many institutions skip right over that they want to be solution driven, because that's what we're trained to do. Is here's the problem, what's the solution? Let's put it in place, versus can we just step back for a minute and let's actually just understand what our narrative on race is at our institution.
Tia, to just build on that a little bit, Eve, I became deeply aware of the amazing work going on at Greenfield over the years, Greenfield Community College, where you're president. But when the Racial Equity and Justice Institute campuses came together to put together a handbook that we'll be releasing to the nation this September, one of the practices that's in the book from Greenfield, Seeds of Success, Participatory Action Research Project. When I first became aware of the work that Greenfield is doing in that space to truly listen to students and to truly come from an asset-based and cultural wealth model, was astounding to me. I know you're moderating, but would you be willing to share a little bit about the extraordinary work that's going on at GCC in this project?
Oh, well, we are very, very lucky to have a couple of faculty members and one of our former dean who engaged students in asset-based participatory action research to uncover what the experience of students were, what the experiences of students were, and putting them in the driver's seats, really training them with research skills and co-constructing with them the model that they were going to use in interviewing students, in interviewing staff, to understand where are we helping students succeed and where are we really creating roadblocks. And some of it is intentional and some of it may not be purposeful, but to think through first of all, to gather systematically qualitative evidence, because I think we spend so much time looking at institutional research data, which tends to be quantitative data, that we sometimes miss out on the students' voices. So allowing the students to be in the driver's seat, to gather that information and to analyze it with them, and to also bring in the quantitative data, the institutional research data, to say, with this comprehensive set of information, what are we gleaning? What are we learning about ourselves as an institution? Was really illuminating for us as an institution, as a college, and to understand where we were succeeding for students of color, for all of our students, for our economically disadvantaged students, and also being in a rural area for our rural students, because we know that they are geographically marginalized, given where we are. And it was just really helpful. And as I say, in the chapter that you alluded to, we've taken this from the perspective of institutionalizing equity in all of our necessary documents, in all of our accountability frameworks, and not just taking the perspective of we need another new initiative to be able to make progress or to check the box and say we did this. So it's been really engaging students, engaging faculty and staff in building the level of cultural dexterity that we know is conducive to all students succeeding, and to also have a culturally based, sensitive, and appropriate approach to this work.
It's such important work. I'm glad that your campus is really providing an exemplar through that chapter of what it is to truly listen to students. So thank you for your leadership.
Yeah, it's been great. We've really enjoyed all of the activities that we've been engaged in, and have been very reflective about our learning and ensuring that our Reggie faculty and staff members are also able to bring back and learn from what the non-Reggie folks are learning about. I had a question for you, Tia. I know that you engage with a lot of college leaders, a lot of presidents, boards, etc., who are doing the DEI work or who are trying to be more responsive. What do you see as critical, fundamental elements for folks who really want to meaningfully, authentically engage in this work? What are some of the basic criteria to get started and to sustain this work so that it doesn't simply stay at the initiative level? And I will ask the same of you also, Sabrina.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen in some of the most promising discussions and workshops and engagements that I've had with leaders across the country, when I see them, they see the goals, they see them, they make them aspirational, they see the possibility for change, and they also are very analytical on what needs to happen. And I think that when I'm engaged with institutions that have had that deeper reflection like that, it's immediately evident. It's there. It is. And when I've been working with trustees, which you're right, I've had the opportunity of that, and just the level and depth of questions that they ask about their roles and what it is that they need to do in order to change and to support the institution and the institutional leaders, it's so evident. And and that's why I'm smiling right now, because I'm thinking back to when I've had those very hopeful conversations, but real conversations about the possibility of change. And you can see it. It's immediate. It's immediate when you're working with an institution and they're being honest about, okay, you know what, we're not doing this. And they're not defensive about it. They are, we need to embrace this work. We need to embrace and we need to acknowledge that we're not on the same path or the path that we need to be if we're going to educate and support our students in the way that we say we value that work. And I'll work with those institutions every day of the week and continue to work with them every day of the week, because it's not just a demonstration of, okay, we're doing DEI work. It's actually the reality of the DEI work. So when I have the opportunity to work with you, Sabrina, others that are reflecting, and I think that's what we're doing as part of the new undergraduate initiative in Massachusetts, and the conversations that we're having that's coming out of the work that's being led by the Department of Higher Education in Massachusetts. I really feel I don't know, these leaders care, and I'll skip a meeting to meet another meeting. Don't tell anyone, to get to that other meeting, to be like, oh, I want to be with them, because these are leaders that are actually thinking deeply about the new undergraduate experience and what we need to do to address that. So I just, some people are probably going to get me for saying that. Like, I wonder if I'm one of those institutions, and I'll never tell, but I will tell you that working with the two of you and my colleagues in that effort has, something that has sustained me and kept me moving forward. So thank you.
That's great. Yeah, you mentioned that this is emotionally laborious work, and it is, but the rewards are also very gratifying when you work with institutions that are truly engaged. Yes. Thank you for that. How about you, Sabrina? Through Reggie, you've also worked with a number of institutions, a number of leaders across the hierarchy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I'm going to speak to white leaders. We really have to do our work, our own work, around the ways. I'm going to speak for myself. I need to continue to do my work around the ways in which my whiteness and my cultural and family, for me, my family upbringing, really socialized me to not support racial justice. And although personally I came to the awareness at a very young age that upbringing was wrong, I am fed messages every day that solidify whiteness and white supremacy. And I need to continuously work on myself. And I encourage and applaud other white leaders for working on themselves to decenter our whiteness, and to really think about what will our campuses look like when we centralize racial equity and justice. The research is clear. The research is very clear. When we centralize racial equity and justice, all students succeed. And when we use the universalism approach, all students do not succeed, and who does not succeed is very clear, and it's Black and brown students. And so to those campuses that are worried about enrollment, centralize racial equity and justice. To those campuses that are worried about doing the right thing, centralize racial equity and justice, right? The answer is the same. Number two, for those who serve at the trustee level or the president level at a rank above mine, I'm so grateful for good leadership at Bridge, among our trustees, with President Clark, across the region, across the nation. I found the ACE monograph on shared equity leadership important. Mm-hmm. I hope people take that. It's a free access resource. I hope people take that and read that. It really echoes the themes that Tia has been sharing today. We have to do our own work, but then we have to make sure that every person on campus understands their unique role in moving this work forward. It will take us all. You know, we started talking about the pandemic, which is a virus, and the analogy isn't perfect, but I think about systemic racism often as a virus in that it does keep replicating. Mm-hmm. And we have got to be on it and look at every policy, every practice, every procedure, every interaction. And I will say for myself, every thought, word, and deed through this lens. But here's the cool part. And now I'm pulling on the work of Bobby Harrow in her cycle of liberation. This work liberates us all. This work is hopeful and it liberates us all. Before I die, now I'm 58, so God willing, I have a while. This is my bucket list. Before I die, I want to see this change. I wanted to see it in America, but if that's too big, I hope not. I want to see it in enough organizations like campuses. I'm confident Bridgewater State University will be one of those. I am confident members of the REJI will be among those, but it's going to take all of us to get this done. And it's really not very complicated if we're willing to do the work.
Very true. Yeah, willpower and vision are very important. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate the time that we've been able to spend together today, ladies. It's been great. And for folks who may have missed the title of Tia's book, she is a co-author of From Equity Talk to Equity Walk. There you go. And as you can see, Sabrina's is well read and well referenced. Thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful having you, and I look forward to seeing you again on another episode.